Hello and welcome to Chapter 12 of the Modern Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Mufuz Chowdhury. I'm here with my fellow host, Camille, and we're excited to be back for another week. We are at the dozen mark, the 1 dozen, 1, 2. We made it here. We're excited to dive in further, and I am so stoked about today's topic, which is, I think, something that I've talked about a lot in my career and really tried to do the best that I can to articulate that complex version of what we know this topic to be. And I'm so grateful that today I don't have to dissect it alone because it is very complex. And although my stories may not always be the one that resonates, it always helps to have a second variation of stories that aligns with the same topic. So, Camille, how are you doing, man? How's your week been? And how has your Halloween been? We are the day after Halloween, so it's important to talk about the amazing event that takes place every year.
My week has been great. My weekend even better. Halloween was really fun, especially since this was the first time in 6 years I got to celebrate it. In Poland, it's not that common yet, and especially with the new government, Halloween isn't really celebrated. So it was great to actually do it, and actually doing couple's costume, we had a lot of fun, and I'm still recovering from it. So it was a great time. How was yours?
Mine was excellent as well, man. We spent it out in the city. Is it just me, or one of the best perks of being in a relationship is those couple costumes? I gotta tell you, man, to me, that sold me, if anything. But the world needs to know what was our couple costumes. I'll start first because I think you're gonna one up the crap out of me. I know what your couple costume is, and I have nothing on you. But Priya and I decided that we would dress up this year as M&Ms. The flavored candy, not the wrapper. And we decided to dress up as a human version of it, which allowed me to keep it quite casual, actually. I really feel like I undersold how good it could have been, but we just looked adorable together, man. When you see our photos, you're like, I get it. I get why these guys chose the costume that they chose. So I had a Eminem toque, an Eminem t-shirt, and I had two massive gloves. So if you can kind of picture the Eminem character's hands, they have these white hands that looks like Mickey Mouse gloves. I had those on the entire time. And I got to tell you, being outdoors, it kept me quite warm. So I was happy with that. And Priya on her side had like a bit of a headband with an M&M on top of it. And for some reason, the girl costume got far better perks. She got a t-shirt, but she also got overalls that was like M&M branded. So she really had a style going on there that really worked well. So we showed up and we actually bumped into a green M&M at the party, and it was just an easy conversation starter. So in many ways, I really much enjoyed that. How about yourself, Mister Superstar? I remember Camille actually was came to an event that I was at just the week before Halloween, and I asked him what he was wearing, and when he said it, I gotta tell you, I thought he was joking. I thought he was kidding, but when I saw the photo, I was like, okay, okay, he pulled it off. Camille, what on earth was the couple costume that the both of you wore for the Halloween event?
All right, so my girlfriend and we went as 80s aerobic instructors, and I came out fully decked out in like a wig, um, and like honestly, it was probably not the best idea given how cold Halloween was, and the ride there was kind of awkward in the Uber because like my one piece leotard were like short, so it's all like I was like sitting almost bare legged on the like Uber driver seat. Well, not the Uber driver, but like in the back seat of the Uber car, and it was cold, but luckily we were indoors most of the time, and it was super fun. She was really well dressed as well, and we kind of color coordinated a bit too, so it was great.
Be honest, you have stolen the show at your Halloween party with that costume. And also, did you turn up the personality of what that person should be in that costume as well?
Oh, the tough questions they come. I thought that we would wait until later, but no, I tried my best not to turn up the personality. I wouldn't make everyone do like aerobics, like especially the 80s stuff, like what kicking and jumping and all that. But I did do the Macarena if that was anything. So there was that. When that girl's
There
involved,
you
I'll
go.
actually start dancing. I never dance.
There we go. There we go. Man, I feel like I missed out. Usually we celebrate these type of events together, but it was fun for us to kind of go off into our own worlds and come back with what sounds like was a riot of a night. So I was extremely excited to hear about that, man. And you killed that costume. Like I said to you earlier, it looks like you've been working out your entire life waiting for this costume to fit on perfectly. I was mighty impressed.
Well, thanks. I was actually worried about it because putting it on, I almost broke it twice, ripping. So it was a huge ego boost, and at the same time too, I was worried about coming off like a bit arrogant and a bit more of a show off. So I had to deal with that insecurity. And would you happen to know it? Our topic today is about better self talk. So how's that for topical?
It's like it was meant to be, man. We gotta get into that a little bit and really figure out what on earth happened mentally when you went through that and how you overcame it. But here's what I want to start, man. I want to start with the inspiration behind this topic. As you know, we have listeners that tune into our show, whether it's live or on replay. And once in a while, they'll send us a message and tell us some interesting things. I've heard some incredible stories. You know, one individual says that she never misses a show and she always replays the episodes because she gets so much value that she can't listen to it in just one sitting and call it a day. I get messages from people that say they were so motivated that they actually passed it on to other people because they thought someone that they knew could also benefit from. So a message that I got, which happened to be this morning, so it really worked out nicely for today's topic, was just someone that shared a quote with me. And this quote was not authored. It was just a blank motivational quote that was sent to me. And the person said that this quote made them think of the Modern Mindset podcast. And I was flattered. So, of course, naturally, I had to go in and read what it was about. And this is what the quote said, Camille. The biggest wall you have, I'm sorry, let me try it again. The biggest wall you have got to climb. You know what? Now that I read it, it was really poorly written. The biggest wall that you have to climb is the one you build in your mind. And I thought that was really, really interesting. Such a great quote to start off our episode today, right? When you think about obstacles in your life, you often think a lot about different obstacles you got to overcome. And when you think of walls as a symbol, you kind of think of that as an external item, right? Things that are in your way that you need to overcome and climb in order to get ahead. But one thing that we often forget, and sometimes it's hard to keep tabs on, is how much your mindset, or as I call your mental chatterbox, can play that same role of holding you back. And you know what I've kind of been loving about our podcast show, I've been thinking a lot about the past episodes we've done, Camille. And I think of like there's some episodes that we talk about that I think plays on the offense. We talk about how to get ahead, how to be proactive, how to set ourselves up and plant the seeds now to get ahead. But then there's some episodes like I talked about previously that I felt completely out of it and I didn't know how to get back on track. That we're talking a little bit more about defense. We're talking a little bit about how to recover, how to protect ourselves, how to make sure we don't get dragged back rather than paying attention to moving forward. And I think that today's talk about better self talk kind of plays on both areas. I think it allows us to defend ourselves from harm, and it also allows us to move ahead and position ourselves for success and really allow us to gain the courage and the willpower to be able to do a lot of the things that maybe we're afraid to do. So when I initially messaged you not too long ago, I think even an hour ago, and I said, hey, this is what I think we should talk about today. I'm very curious when I ask you, what is the first memory or thought that came to mind when I use the word self-talk? You know, when you think about a moment in your life where self-talk played a big role in your life, either positive or negative, I would love for you to start with that and share a little bit about where your head went to when we brought up the conversation of self-talk.
Thinking about it in terms of doing this podcast, I naturally jumped to a bunch of different times in my life and like different periods where I had like these kind of different attitudes towards self-talk. For instance, when I was doing my training in basic military, like qualification courses, that self-talk, even the negative self-talk, was actually super helpful to me. And then when I think about it in the time period when I was working on my social anxiety, that same negative self-talk was super destructive. And then when I kind of shifted and made my self-talk more positive, then it became really effective in friendships and being social. But then that same self-talk was also kind of harmful in being close to people that will say can take advantage of you. So I kind of was reflecting on all those different situations, and then my self-talk now, which I feel is a lot more balanced. I was just coming to the conclusions that like I've changed my mind on this topic so many times, and this one that I currently have, I think best serves me well because like your response to your own emotions and to your externals is dictated basically on your experience. And it might seem like counterintuitive to have like this like negative self-talk, but at the same time too, it was a very powerful and even beneficial source of coping at the time. And then recognizing whether or not that serves you well at this moment is actually one of those most important things to do. So I naturally just thought about all that and the culmination that led to this mindset I have now, and being able to be flexible in my way of thinking given this current situation that I need to have it in.
I'm very curious about the part about how often you've changed your mind around it. That's kind of interesting to me because I feel like yes, from some level, you kind of have that love-hate relationship that you could have with yourself based on experiences that you have and where you decide to put the blame. Is that what you're referring to when you say you've changed your mind a lot about self-talk? Or are you saying the way that you approach what the right way of thinking is has changed a lot? Like which direction do you go there when you said that?
I think the latter, which was what you described, which is how I talk to myself and the best strategy to implement for that time.
Yeah, that's really interesting to me, Camille, because I also think about the role that it plays, and to be honest, I think this might be one of the biggest parts that I think that really matters in your personal development. I credit a lot of my growth in how I've reframed and rewired my way of thinking. I think in many times in my life, I've said that mindset is everything. And I think that mindset is a big part of it because it really is a reflection of the conversation that you have with yourself. One of the things that we talk very heavily about in this show is the idea of being able to observe these thoughts and know what to do with these, right? And a lot of that comes sometimes down to the fact that it may stray you down a different direction. Like if you don't have a good grasp of what you're saying to yourself each day, you may get dragged into territories that you have no control over. What also is quite beautiful about it when I speak about the offense is the fact that you could completely change your entire life if you just change your way of thinking. You could completely change who you are as an individual just by changing the way of thinking, especially if you're in a world where you're unhappy with who you are or where you are in your life. I go back to when I was going in high school and I was an extreme shy individual that had a lot of challenges doing things that I wanted to do in my life. And a lot of those times, the conversation that I would have with my head is that this isn't who I am. I'm just a shy person. Or this wasn't for me. You know, you kind of see someone take leadership of a situation. Or you kind of see someone that owns a room when they're delivering a presentation. Or you kind of see someone that is just being able to drop strong knowledge and strong opinions about a specific topic. I would always see myself as kind of the one needing to take the backseat because that wasn't who I was. And over the years, what I started realizing more and more is that it's not that that was who I was, it's more that I was feeding myself those stories. I was convincing myself, and sadly, convincing myself so well that I believed it that prevented me from taking action. And it gets me excited to think about if I start feeding myself the right stories, will I go the opposite direction? Can I actually convince myself that I can do these things? And as a result of that, I start becoming the person that I want to be. When you think about it from that perspective, it kind of opens up a big conversation, right? It opens up the conversation first and foremost of can you really change your entire core way of thinking, like does that mean that who you are is just who you chose to be at this given moment, and you can change it on any given day? Or is it you evolving and stacking on top of who you've become through the years of experience down the road? Going back to who I used to be in high school as a shy individual, by consistent repetition and proving to myself over and over that it can be done, what I started realizing is that I don't have those conversations in my head anymore, and that the conversations are very, very different. When I walk into a room as maybe a speaker of an event, my mind is already rooting me on and saying, "You're going to rock this event." I'm so excited to see how much your audience gets out of your talk. Like, that's the type of conversation I have in my head. Where I know many years ago, it was far on the other extreme. It would be, you need to walk away and come up with an excuse right now, because if you bomb, everyone's going to laugh at you and you're going to hate yourself because of that. What are your thoughts around that, Camille? Like, do you think that, especially on my first question, like, do you even have a true identity, or is that something that you can change on any given day? Like, is this the costume that you choose to wear? And I'm playing to the Halloween theme here. Is this the costume that you choose to wear because you think it's what's serving you today? Or is this actually who you are, and but you can tweak parts of your life? Where do you think your belief around how thought process changes you, where do you stand on when I come with those two definitions your way?
I have a lot, like my mind is going in a lot of different directions. So I completely have to agree with the belief. Just being able to believe that you can even do it is paramount to performance. And even in fact, psychologically speaking, the most excellent performers in most fields, like especially athletes, belief is paramount to performance. And actually, just having that alone leads to better outcomes. When we're talking about the self and identity, I think that's a little bit like it becomes a bit more complicated, because that's where the self talk with the labels kind of essentially can hinder you from becoming yourself. And I mean, whether you attach a good one or a bad one. And that's where we can go into the semantics. But to put that conversation to the side and just focusing on who we actually are, I think that's not a result of our minds. It's not a result of the identities that we choose to carry with us, like the identity of whatever your profession is, or whatever your hobbies are, or whatever qualities you have. I think that comes from a separate source within, and I think that's up to the individual themselves to discover along the way. And these identities that we pick up are just suited if we're able to detach and actually use them as tools rather than uh, as beliefs of who we are. I think that's where we gain the most benefit from them. So I would argue that these identities and these labels and these qualities that we attach to ourselves are actually not us. And even with our experience exposes more of who we could become. And but that comes at a cost too, because it can actually further entrench us in our own minds and further entrench us in our own ego. So it's up to us about how learning how to manage that, and learning how to even detach from our own ego, and being able to deal with these like micro traumas that we suffer throughout life, and dealing with them in a way that doesn't prevent us from becoming ourselves and actually allowing us to flourish. So, in a long-winded answer, I would say that that we, like as the individual, are separate from our experiences and from our mind, and it's about discovering who we are and being able to be that is completely separate from all of those things. And the self-talk just helps almost facilitate that, because I think you can even distinguish sometimes, maybe more commonly for certain individuals than other, that you'll have a voice that you won't believe half the time, or maybe even all the time, depending on how severe you've deprived yourself of being who you are and how much you've lied to yourself. And then there's going to be this inner voice that you can't even describe, that feels almost unfamiliar sometimes. And then I think just being able to discern between the two, you can find out who you actually are.
I think about the servitude component a lot when it comes to how the mind works, and I bring in the idea of I bring in the comparison of the mind being similar to maybe how you were raised by your mother, right? The mother is the protector at the end of the day, and it gives you advice based on what they believe, or what in this scenario, what she believes to be the safest outcome for you as a human being. So, you, as we know, as we've talked about a lot, you've done a lot of fun, extreme activities lately, and one of them being bungee jumping. And although the bungee jumping could be an extraordinary and exhilarating experience that could really change how you feel, how you think, and make you want to try more new things in life and maybe conquer fear, the mom would rather tell you not to do it, even out of that small, tiny percentage of a chance that something could go wrong and that you could hurt yourself and maybe die. So, as a result of that, your mom will try to convince you to do the latter because it really believes that that's the better solution, not realizing that there is other things that you may lose out on as a result of it, as long as you're safe. And I think the mental chatterbox, in many ways, plays that motherly figure role, right? At the end of the day, it wants to prolong life. It wants you to get further ahead in the safest way possible. And safety doesn't just end at physical decisions, it also ends at emotional decisions. If something that you do can harm you emotionally and your mind thinks that that may be the case, the self talk that you typically have with yourself is doing everything you can to avoid it. This comes right down to even social settings. When you get really, really shy around a stranger, or you really, really want to talk to someone, and all of a sudden the voice in your head tells you to not do it. They tell you to avoid it. They tell you to make up an excuse. They tell you to go for a warm-up round and maybe see if it's safe. Dip your feet in the water a little bit. All those things are trying to do is protect you from what you fear may be an emotional breakdown, where when not realizing that by you overcoming that fear, you're able to grow and become someone better, and you're able to now really build that confidence that the next time you can do it over and over again. We hear a little bit about um, the swimming pool concept that you and I think talked about quite a bit in the past, maybe off camera and off microphone, around the idea of cannonballing into a pool, right? And the idea of cannonballing into a pool comes with that initial fear that you have, knowing that the water is going to be freezing cold, and you hesitate a little bit, and you have to sometimes convince yourself, like, hey, it'll be okay, I've done it in the past. And it's only when you run and dive and take that leap of faith that you go through the process of feeling that chilly feeling that you do when you first hit the water, but then coming out of it and saying, that's it, I want to do that again. And once you get that first cannonball out of the way, you can jump out of the pool and do it as many times as you want, because you've silenced that chatterbox. You showed that chatterbox that it's okay. You showed that chatterbox you'll be safe. However, when you come back again the next day and you're dry and you reset your brain, that voice comes up again and tries to once again talk you out of things. And I think it's a long-term grooming of the mind that really allows you to change the way it speaks to you. I'm actually finding it very difficult to pinpoint the exact moments in my life that the voice has changed from being someone that's overprotective to being someone that's encouraging. But I can tell you the reason it's tough is that it's not a single moment. It's not a single event. It was consistent events and consistently putting myself in a place where I get challenged and maybe prove it wrong in order to break out of it. And piece by piece, centimeter by centimeter, I've been able to shift away from it, where now when I look back, I almost can't believe that I've allowed myself to get into that spot in the first place.
When I think about that too, it brings to mind the whole confidence piece you and I talk about a lot, which is very important, I think, for like overcoming anxiety and that initial don't do it kind of sensation that we have. And you know what? I think that's probably the whole reason why cold showers are becoming more and more popular as a trend. And it has all these benefits too. It's that initial getting through that anxiety of this is going to suck and I don't want to do this and it's going to hurt. That stress, that initial stress, once you overcome that, it can give you some momentum through the day. So some people may find that very helpful, actually, in implementing cold showers. When in terms of that transformation over time, again, I also can attribute it to singular events. It is just multiple days at a time. And it's funny how, even as you described, doing the cannonball into that cold water, once you're dry, even on the same day, it can still have that initial fear response, even though you just had the proof that it's okay and it's safe. And I think that's what kind of makes it difficult to build over time, because it's not that, again, like we said last time as well, it's not that you make this emotion less intense, it's you make yourself stronger for that. So in that same regard, confidence is not built when you know the outcome, because if you're certain about what's going to happen, then you don't need to trust yourself, because trusting is not knowing 100%. And trusting is about not knowing the answer, but still being able to commit to the process and still wanting to commit to the process. So trusting yourself comes from being uncertain about that outcome and actually allowing yourself to be put in that situation that you want to be put in, or maybe you don't want to be put in, but actually trusting yourself that it's going to be okay at the end, because most of the time it is. And these walls that we build up, especially with anxiety, make it seem like these are life or death scenarios. And especially because when we were evolving, we didn't have so many complex situations like these. It just was almost life or death situation. It was either I'm going to die or I'm going to live. So this is a remnant of our psychology, but it's still very important today, and it's very important to understand that this is just how our mind operates. So you have to be able to take those feelings and actually process them as emotion and as information, and being able to separate yourself and be like, do I listen to this piece, or do I imagine that the reward is better and the risk is worth taking? And then making that informed decision with that emotion rather than allowing the emotion to rule you.
I got some thoughts here, but before I dive into the thoughts, that cold shower piece that you said, I'd love for you to break down the benefits here, because I remember that I was in a very, very active Facebook thread one day, and this one dude kept going off about how cold showers is a solution to your problem. And then I finally went in and I said, hey, just out of curiosity, what is the benefits of cold shower? And like he kind of couldn't answer it, and then he just came back and dropped the link, like wanting me to kind of read it, because I guess he didn't know how to answer it. If you had to simplify it for the audience members and especially for myself, what are the benefits of taking a cold shower, and why should someone consider doing that over a warm hot shower, which also has benefits?
So, from the research that I've read, which granted has been a long time and I'm not up to date with current research, it has been shown that taking cold showers boosts alertness, increases stress in the short term, but it kind of is that beneficial stress that allows you again to become stronger and builds kind of this resilience within yourself. It also does seem to boost levels of testosterone, which is the male hormone, which is associated with making effort feel good and being a little bit more competitive, which can translate to better outcomes. However, the increase doesn't show isn't shown to be as lasting or as beneficial as people may think. However, it's still there. And so, if I were to summarize it in simple terms, it does make you more awake. It does teach you how to get past that uncomfortableness. So it does build some sort of uh, strength within yourself to like push forward, and does like can increase bravery. And in certain situations, it can help with healing, and it does help with recovery, especially after like muscular fatigue, and in certain cases as well, injuries. However, again, I would read up more about it yourself and researching and talking to your doctor about it.
I like that. That's super helpful. And what is the best practices? Like how many minutes do you, and again, putting an asterisk here, ask your doctor, make sure you do your research, because I don't want Camille's statement to be the statement that you live life by. But based on your experience, how many minutes do you spend doing the cold shower each day?
So when I used to do it, I used to just do the cold shower, and then or I would start off with just a normal hot shower, and then at the end, cold, and I'd stand there for as long as I could, up to a minute. Most studies say you have to immerse yourself in the cold and do ice cold baths for 20 minutes. However, if you're looking for that increase in just like alertness and being able to become more brave, let's say, for lack for making it simple, it if you just take a normal shower and then take a cold shower and sit there until you're cold and you're used to it, then jump out, dry yourself off, and then when you feel warm again, go into the cold. If you do that about 5 times, I don't know why five is a lucky number here, but it seems like it is. Then that's good enough. However, just any sort of small incremental movement and like implementations of it seems to be effective enough.
I like it, man. That's super helpful. It makes me laugh a bit with when you say it became a bit of a trend, similar to that guy in the message board that I was asking what the benefits are. Sometimes I feel like people are just jumping on the trend without actually knowing the full benefits of it, because there are benefits to hot shower as well. In fact, um, I saw many posts and studies where they split it right down and saying you can do either depending on what you're trying to get. It's kind of like what you talked about in the previous episode with the blocking off one nostril and the other. It's like, is one bad for you? Is one good for you? Well, not necessarily. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. And I think this hot shower and cold shower works in a very similar fashion. What I was going to say regarding the other items is it's kind of interesting when you think about the necessity to master your self-talk, right? Because when you look at it in a world where how people are competing, let's use athletes for as an example. When you look at athletes that are competing, and I'm a huge fan of basketball, I watch the Toronto Raptors as much as I can. I try not to miss a single game. And you kind of look at these basketball players and you think of them as, wow, they're incredibly skilled, right? They're at superstars because they're so skilled. And you think about what you're judging them by. The truth is, you're not necessarily judging them by just their athletics. You're judging them based on the numbers that they put up. How many points they put up, how many rebounds, how many assists, and so forth. And when you really break it out, it's not just their physical capabilities, is where they're able to be confident to be able to hit those shots, where they're able to master the self-talk and the anxiety of the fact that there's thousands and thousands of people that are watching them, whether it's live inside of the stadium or on TV, which could add up to millions. With knowing that that many eyeballs are on you, or especially in key crunch time moments where your shot determines whether you win or not. You think about all those that aligns and you realize that the world is not forgiving in those areas. When you want to be the best in the world or you want to be a superstar, there is no care of whether you use, oh, I was nervous as an excuse. And I remember this, Camille, like when I used to go to school and we used to do school presentations, even like school case competitions where we would sit in front of panels and judges, you would quite often hear someone say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm nervous. Or the panelists will say, it's okay, take a deep breath and try again. And they're very forgiving. And you kind of think like, oh, that's okay because everyone is nervous. But that's not enough. That's not the end of the story. Knowing that everyone is nervous is not the end of the story, because the second part is the need to master that part of your mentality so that you can perform your best. When I get up on stage and I speak at conferences, it doesn't matter if I was nervous and I let it overtake me. If I bombed, the story is that I bombed. Not that I did a great presentation, but I was a bit nervous. It's I bombed. And I think of it that way. The importance of mastering that part of your self-talk, in many ways, if you really want to play at that level, it's an absolute necessity. When I was reading a book that is written by a well-known author, Dan Sullivan, who wrote the book Who Not How, he talked very much about the very first chapter of the book where he broke down Michael Jordan's career. And he broke down the fact that Michael Jordan is considered the best in the world, but what they forget about the fact that he had an incredible coach that wrote out all his plays, but more importantly, the mental coach that he hired. Michael Jordan, his entire career, not only had a physical coach, but had a mental coach that allowed him to mentally get into the game so that he could focus and perform the best that he can. Hear me loud and clear. The best in the world still need to work on this. Similar to what we just said about the cannonball theory, even though you think you've mastered and proven it wrong, you need to constantly keep working it out. Because if you don't constantly keep working that part of yourself out, you'll notice that that part of you can abandon you very, very quickly. And when it abandons you, you realize how much you're feeling things that you forgot that you feel anymore. How much those parts of you starts creeping up in your life and overtaking you, which is why I'm actually slightly out of fear that those things will creep back. And as a result of that, it plays a role in why I keep working on myself and work on my personal development. When I go through a slump and I don't read books for a while, or I don't watch personal development videos for a while, or I don't have conversations with you for a while, which actually is a critical piece, I actually start feeling myself losing that part of me, that critical way of thinking, that confidence that I'll have, or that determination to go and take over the world. I lose that part of me. I talked a lot about how conversations with you made me start getting my fitness in order. And I feel like if I didn't have that conversation or even frequent check-ins where you and I talk about some fitness things that happened, I may even start losing that part of my life. It's very important to keep that side in check, not only to help yourself grow, but to also ensure that you don't shrink along the way.
For maintenance, yeah, I agree completely with everything you're saying. It is so important. I think it almost seems kind of surreal to think that even belief does affect how you perform and how well you do. And as I mentioned before, even just if you want to be excellent in what you do and even competitive, the most competitive people are the ones with the strongest beliefs in themselves. It is actually a core requirement in performing well. And it's hard to determine why, I guess, if you want to break it down into micro, but it is also just very important to understand that everyone has these like insecurities, even people at the top of their game, and everyone has these off days, and that anxiety can always creep up on you, saying, "Oh, you're having an off day," or "Oh, you remember that time you failed," and it can easily shatter you if you're not prepared to handle it, or if you've been kind of lacking in allowing yourself to fall into these old patterns of giving into these emotions that can be negative. Um, I was I'm often blown away when I think about it too, and I wish I can give the name of the actual sprinter. Well, was it sprinter? Uh, yes. It was a certain race. I can't remember the exact distance, but there was a short term race that people would think you cannot run a mile faster than this, and as soon as one person beat it, everyone else did. Like everyone started doing it, and I mean like it became very common to actually beat that record. And all that was just a limitation of belief in the possibility of that happening. And as soon as that was removed, then people performed even better. So imagine how much you could compound your success just by kind of eliminating that doubt within yourself surrounding how well you're going to do. And we can also point out to like neuroscience and psychiatry as well, like neuropsychiatry, that um, the things that you learn, these skills that you have, like even talking to yourself is a skill as well. If you don't use it, you lose it. And these kind of patterns within your brain over time, they kind of rearrange themselves every so often. Science used to say that your brain just is fixed after 25, after you develop all these neural connections. Then they start saying, every 7 years you have something called neurological pruning or neuron pruning, which is that your neurons in your brain rearrange in a different way, so you essentially can become a new person. And now science is becoming more and more specific in this time, which I don't even want to use numbers anymore because I feel like by the time I say it, it's going to change to something new. But the truth of the matter is, you still have to learn to do these things, and you have to maintain it. You can't just think that that this status of belief within yourself or this positive self-talk that you cultivated for so long is going to stay because you just achieved it once. It is a constant process, and and it's very important to still cultivate and still work on it, and to do the things that you like and that facilitate that kind of growth in the direction that you so choose. So, within myself too, I've noticed that if I kind of neglect that kind of work within myself, I also tend to become more depressed, and I end up becoming more tired and not wanting to achieve so much. And even even when it comes to things like studying for medical exams. If I don't study medicine for a while, then it feels like, oh my god, I've forgotten so much. So I had to restart, not from scratch, but to rebuild that foundation. Even though it becomes faster, it's still lost by not using it. And I think that becomes very challenging when you have people like me that that want to pick up all these different hobbies and wants to be like the expert in everything. That you have to actually choose your sacrifice and live with it. Like, choose the path you want to go down and recognize that as a result of that, you're gonna have to give up some of these things that they seem interesting, but are they worth the sacrifice? That's a question you're gonna have to find out too.
It comes back to what you were saying earlier about asking yourself if this is going to be, I don't remember how you phrase it, but is it worth doing, right? Is it worth doing to get you where you want to go? And, those are the walls that you want to climb. The truth is, there's a lot of walls you want to climb that won't serve you or your North Star of where you're headed. You could be going the complete opposite direction and you'll still hit walls, right? Like, you could just decide, hey, I don't want to work anymore, and I'm going to just stop doing any work at all. And all of a sudden, you're going to hit a wall where you say, man, I need financial support, and I got to find a way to get that. Now you got to go and ask or talk to people or apply for jobs or go to interviews all over again. No matter which direction you go, there is going to be roadblocks, and there is going to be mental roadblocks, and that's what makes it very, very difficult, because some people think that there is a path to least resistance. And although that might be the case, it's not always the path that you think is the path to least resistance, right? It's not always the easiest path. Sometimes you may think like doing less is going to get you more. It's not going to give you the strain, or it's not going to give you the physical and mental challenges that you would experience because you decided not to go get out of your comfort zone. But what about the things that you lack because you stayed in your comfort zone, right? What about the fact that you may have not been able to live the life that you've always visioned and desired because you chose to stay in your comfort zone and take that short-term benefit, that instant gratification of staying in bed today, or instant gratification of not trying to overcome the mental chatterbox. Those things seem easy up front, but from a long-term situation, is it worth it? And I think that's first and foremost worth thinking about. I also think a lot about the fact that you don't necessarily need to climb all the walls, because there is another big conversation that happens, which is the idea of banking on your strengths and not going against your weaknesses, right? Because some people will think of weaknesses as a wall that they need to climb, right? I'm not good at this. My mind is not letting me become better at this. I'm going to do everything I can to get past this. And they try to convert that self-talk into someone that's rooting for them for something that may be their weakness. And I don't actually believe that's the direction you should go. I actually think this is where my belief in delegation comes in. The fact that you could find other people to do the things that you just shouldn't be doing based on the fact that it's considered a weakness, and not trying to rewire your way of thinking and not thinking of it as a weakness. I'm not the tallest person in the room. I'm usually not the tallest person in the room. And I'm not going to convince myself that I'm going to be able to jump higher than the tallest person in that room, no matter how much self-talk I try to do, right? Sometimes I got to just accept that role and instead look at the benefits of someone like my height can be able to achieve. And I think that way of thinking is equally as important, because when you start thinking about it from that perspective, to your point, you can doing from when you have a lot of things that you want to do, by delegating some of those items, you can actually spend more time on the things that you want to do. A good example of this is with my love and hate relationship with sales. I'm an extremely great marketer. I think I'm an amazing marketer, but I think I'm terrible at sales. And the difference between that is sometimes setting yourself up and building a big marketing empire versus going to a networking event and trying to close a sale. When I first joined my marketing agency lifestyle, before I got the role I'm in, my first task was to actually go out to networking events and try to close some deals, try to get some sales, try to get people to sign up for different programs. And man, I remember the amount of preparation that I needed to do mentally. I was of the broke kid that needed to take the transit bus on the way to the event, which I saw as a benefit, because what that allowed me to do is give myself a mental pep talk as I'm taking the bus to that event. I remember wearing headphones and loading up my favorite pump up playlist to get myself pumped up to go into those events and kill it. I remember when I go to that event, I wouldn't immediately walk up to the group. I would circulate and look for maybe the easiest group of individuals to talk to, the ones that seem just as nervous as I am. And I would think of the best ways to approach them mentally so that I could perform my best and strike up a good conversation while at the same time trying to convince myself like, oh, I'm not going to seem boring. I'm not going to seem like a loser. I'm actually going to seem interesting. They're actually going to want to talk to me. I went through all those, Camille, to only to come out with maybe two business cards the entire night. And then one day I decided that sales wasn't something I wanted to do. And fortunately, I'm part of a team that consists of salespeople that love going out to networking events and love doing that part and love that part of them that they see closing sales and socializing and networking as a big strength. Where to me, I saw it as a big weakness. And now we're in a team together, so we're still able to achieve the long-term vision without me having to force myself into uncomfortable levels that I don't believe that I need to do all by myself. So I've actually changed my way of thinking around that over the years, Camila. I got to tell you, before I really saw that I had to overcome all these, but now I ask myself, are there areas that I could actually collaborate or delegate to other people where I focus more on the things that I really want to do or consider my strength? So what's interesting is even though I'm not always going out of my comfort zone, there's still another micro conversation, which is, am I going out of the comfort zone on the things that I really want to go on the comfort zone on? And as complicated as that sounds, it's really something that's worth thinking about when you're trying to dictate which one of these mental walls that you want to climb along the way.
I think what you described works perfectly for, building a business or like being in a role in a team. And when you have like a specific purpose when it comes to, I don't know, when it comes to playing sports, or when it comes to actually like building a project or building a business or performing at like in your career and stuff. I think I think where it might not be the best idea to delegate that would be in terms of yourself as a personality, and these kind of like intangible goals that you have within yourself. And I mean that in a sense, which I'm pretty sure you agree as well, that you know, sometimes, at least I had, and I still do have, the problem where I tell myself that I am this and I am not this. And it works out in, for example, in a way that when I'm around my brother, who tends to be very, well, very egregious and very good with people, he loves throwing jokes, and everyone loves hearing them and being around him for that reason. And whenever I tell a joke in front of him, he never laughs. Now, because of that, I'm intimidated to tell jokes around him. And I tell myself that I'm not funny, or I'm not funny enough for him. And so I'm good at being serious. I'm good at being like connecting with people emotionally. So I'm going to just do that. And as a result, when I'm put in situations where, I want to actually have fun, I don't, because I allow myself to be afraid of this proving myself right that I'm not funny, and proving myself that I'm not funny enough, especially around him. So why even bother? And that kind of detracts from my own goal and my own experience, which is, to actually like live in the present moment and allow myself to act in the way that I want to, because I just want to have fun sometimes. So why not allow myself to do that? And that can extend to other aspects of my life too, which tends to be, which is why I brought up in the beginning as well, how my self talk has changed over the years and how I saw the benefits and the downsides to each one's, which were, for instance, when I was in the military, and afterwards, I would tell myself that I'm not good enough, and because I'm not good enough, that relieved the pressure of doing well, or like doing as well as some of the best people, and instead taught me that I have to at least be average. And as a result, that goal was a lot easier to attain, so I was able to work harder and push myself further. And then as a result, when I gained more confidence, I told myself I was smart. And because I was smart, whenever I would study and it became harder and I didn't grasp a subject, if I felt that initial resistance, then it would be an attack on my identity. that I'm not smart enough to grasp this concept. So why even do so in the first place? So instead, it became very easy to abandon that goal, to abandon working on it, because this is actually an attack on my identity. So that's where it can be a positive and a negative thing, even for a positive or a negative identity. And to work on the weakness surrounding who you are and what I guess the weakness does stem from, and where I'm trying to go here from here is saying that when the weakness is not allowing yourself to be you, then I think that's something that needs to be worked on.
Yeah, this is where I have some mixed thoughts as well. And I think this is a debate worthy topic for a bit. See, I actually extend my belief around this beyond just business. And I think it very much matters to the personal life. What's interesting is before you brought up your comparison with your relationship with your brother and trying to be funny, it's interesting you said that because in my mind, I was thinking of like what example makes the most sense to me. And I also thought about like trying to be funny. So it was really nice that you brought that up. Now, I agree to the version of the story that you said, but I actually kind of disagree with the perspective you put on it because I think there's two things happening here. So in my situation, I'm very similar to you, and you kind of know this, right? Like I definitely don't see myself as being the funniest in the room. I actually see myself when I'm around funny people, some if I'm in that mode of like, hey man, I wish I was as funny as them, which don't get me wrong, sometimes definitely crosses my mind because in that moment, sometimes humor is the thing that is most needed. And what happens in those situations is sometimes I try to be funnier. I try to put more effort to try to put more like try to be lighter about situations because I go really, really deep on these things. And I don't always succeed, right? Sometimes I do pretty good, but I don't always succeed. And sometimes I'm hard on myself about that. But this is where I defer a little bit because I think the issue is not about whether I was myself or not, is the fact that I allowed myself to change who I like to be and who I want to be because of the social scenario that I was in. And what I am more upset about that I don't realize until much later is the fact that I let other people dictate who I want to be in that given day. And it's not that I wanted to be funny. It's not that I enjoyed being funny. In fact, if I had a choice, I would rather be deeper in a conversation and serious than be cracking jokes. To me, what's more fun is the first one. I rather much enjoy peeling the onion than laughing about the fact that we're peeling an onion. But at the same time, I think that's where I'm trying to identify, even in your story, is I think that you are yourself. And I think that you enjoy trying to laugh and trying to be funny in certain scenarios. And I actually think you're very good at it. I think you're far more hilarious than I am based on what I've seen in social scenarios. But I don't think when you feel down about it, I don't think it has to do with the fact that you're being yourself or not. I think there's that other part, which is the fact that you let someone else's reaction of your humor actually change the way you thought about yourself. And I think there's that layer, which still does tie in with self-talk. I don't know if it necessarily ties in with what I think. Like in that situation, if I brought back delegation, I'm okay with the fact that someone else is cracking the jokes and bringing light to that situation because I would much rather comment on the deeper part of those. I'd be that asshole that would like comment on why that was funny. I was like, hey, let's take a moment to break this down. Oh, what was so funny? Right? Like I would be that guy that no one likes, but I would be that guy. And I would prefer being that guy. And I would delegate. I know delegation is not the right word in this story, but I'd rather delegate that part and that role to someone else because I see like that being more of the case. That's kind of where I stand, which in interestingly enough, when you look at it from the outside, I feel like you and I would kind of like respond the same way from the outside, but internally, I think that's the emotions that I'm dealing with instead.
I Again, I completely agree where you're coming from, and actually, you're right in pointing out why my example is not a good one, because that is an external. Actually, that one was an external reason why I'm reacting internally, and and you know what? And we can point out even the difference where you prefer just to have the deeper talks, and of course, not all the time. Where most of the time, if I'm in a situation I still do enjoy those deep talks, and there are, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of days where I much rather prefer that, and I'm better at doing that than being light and trying to make jokes. I think especially like in social settings, I really do try. My intention when I go out to social settings is to have a good time, and it actually depends, because if I frame it in a way that I want to connect with someone, then yes, I tend to have that predisposition to having those deeper talks. But if I tell myself that I want to have fun or a good time, then I go in the other direction. So I think it's also based on your intention for the night or for the situation as well. So I think you're absolutely right in the way you pointed out why my example is wrong, and how you and I differ, in at least when we bring out that example as well. I think the point I was making, which of course you alluded to as well, is that it really depends on how you react to whatever the outcome is, and what you tell yourself surrounding that. And if you're disappointed because the outcome is not the same, and then you beat yourself up, then that's pretty harmful.
Yeah, and what you even said there reminds me and takes me back very much to Carl Jung's archetype concept, right? Which is the 12 desires that every human being has, but more so the emphasis on the fact that it's not only one desire that everyone has, it's a spread, and some of them just happens to be more dominant, but the other ones still are very much valid, which is why it makes complete sense to what you just said, which is sometimes you prefer the fun environment. And obviously it depends on the setting, right? If we're going out to a party and the setting is just a lively setting, and maybe the part of your desire that's striking up is having a good time and relaxing and having fun, you're not bringing out that serious side of you. So it is worth addressing the fact that there are many different desires that we have, and different ones strike days based on the circumstance, which completely makes sense for why in some scenarios it's the humor component that you want, which is very much sometimes what I want. As a matter of fact, when I go through a couple of weeks of not having a good laugh, I really crave it. Like, I really crave going out and seeing people, even as an introvert, because I feel like I've been too much stuck in my head thinking about dark things, and I need to kind of come out and see the light once in a while and have a good laugh about it. Or when I'm taking life seriously, I need to remind myself to step back and laugh about it. Some of the things that upset me sometimes, or sometimes the way I respond to something that in my mind I would have pictured myself just like laughing it off, it actually upsets me that I respond to it in a serious manner sometimes. So there are that part of myself too that I need to put into check. But the more and more that I've lived life, Camille, the more I've become more confident that I think 90%, if not 95% of the self-talk that we have that is negative to us is as a result of worrying about what other people think. I truly believe that it's the worry of what other people think that makes us respond in specific ways. Like, we have, when we're out there trying to live life and be ourselves, sometimes we adapt, and we call it adapting as if it's a good thing, but sometimes adapting is happening as a result of not wanting to seem foolish to someone else, not wanting to be embarrassing to someone else, not wanting to lose a friendship with someone else because they may not like what they're seeing from their outside. So based on our perception of what their perception might be of us, we start adapting and we call it a good thing, when that's not the case at all. It might be completely the opposite, and therefore we're resulting from not wanting to be who we are. That example with your brother is a really good example of that, right? Like, based on whether he laughed at a joke or not, you may change who you are completely. And that's just one instance. If it happens repeatedly with someone, you may forever do that, where you completely lose the side of who you used to be. And this has been the case with us every single day since we were kids. We grow up not knowing what is supposed to be the right way to act and the wrong way to act. We are ourselves to the fullest, but once in a while we'll feel embarrassed because someone laughed at us. Once in a while someone scolded us because we did something. Once in a while people may not smile when we expected a smile to come out based on something we thought was funny, and all of a sudden people are no longer acting the same around us. I think those are the outcomes that we see our entire life that grooms us left, right, or center. And based on those left, right, or center, we start to realize where we've landed. And sometimes where we landed is not where we wanted to be. And part of that big unbecoming conversation that we were having in the previous chapter really comes back to this: is can you unbecome and take away what other people, your care for what other people think of you, and start becoming the person you've always wanted to be, regardless of what others think of you. And I've been really proud to see that that side of me has started to come out only in the last 3 4 years. And I wish I could tell you it's come out decades ago, but I can tell you that even 4 or 5 years ago, I was making a lot of decisions based on who my mental chatterbox was telling me to be, based on who was watching me. And it was not always in my favor. It was not always favorable. Sometimes those decisions and who I was being was as a result of not wanting to seem bad in someone else's eyes, even though I would have enjoyed the alternative a lot more. And I think that takes a lot of work. The fact that I've only achieved this in about the last 4 years and I still have work to do makes me realize how many years of self grooming was necessary in order to get there. And I'm curious from your side, when you've kind of gone through that, whether it be it through family, be it through friends, be it through your workplace, be it through who you went to school with, be it of just society every single day, and where you live and who you surround yourself with. At what point did you really feel like you started living the way you've wanted to live and not based on how other people think? And what would you say was the ultimate driving reason that made you finally take control of that wheel and start controlling it in the direction that you wanted to go?
First of all, like everything you said was so well put, and it is absolutely true. Like I think most of what our negative self talk comes from is like our expectations that we put on ourselves, and but mostly how we feel others will think about us, and the judgments that are going to be passed. And I think that comes from comparisons and expectations as well. And when I learned that I was actually doing that even within myself after living for so damn long, that I think was very helpful, because I thought I was always being myself. I thought I was a very gentle, nice, generous person who essentially was a martyr and a hero. Like I wanted to be the perfect person. And in my eyes, what that meant was sacrifice and complete and utter devotion to someone. And I think how that manifested in the way that it did was how strict I was with diet, was how strict I was with exercise, with fasting in general, and doing all these biohacking stuff. And then eventually, how strict I was in the rules that were set within my relationship with my ex fiance. And seeing how that person like acted there, almost completely disregarding what I wanted and who I thought, to a point where I began to live through life and be like, what do I want? I don't know. Like I began questioning everything I was doing. I'm like, why am I why am I in medical school when I don't know if I want to do medicine anymore? Why am I exercising when I'm like I have no goals with exercise. I'm just doing it. And then why am I so strict on my nutrition? And why am I doing all this longevity stuff? And then they found cancerous cells in my body. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like I've got all these signals, and it was like the universe was screaming at my face, being like, wake the fuck up. So I think it was like all of that was happening, and then not realizing that I was sacrificing my own needs for someone else because I thought that's just the way it is. That's if you want to be happy, and this person made me happy and made me really happy at times, then this was the cost to pay. And this was the cost to pay to live this life that I thought would be complete if I have all these dimensions, whether it's the social, the family life, the financial, the career, the health wise. I thought this was just the cost to entry. And realizing that I'm doing everything right, yet all this bad stuff is happening. I think that's what kind of like woke me up to being like, okay, something has to change, and yeah, that was a brutal process. But once I start listening to that voice and actually following through, even though with every fiber of my being, telling me that this is the wrong thing to do because I was so used to lying to myself and so used to having that negative self talk telling me that I'm not good enough for this. And this is the reason why it feels crappy, is because I'm just not good enough. So I just had to stay in it longer, and then eventually I'll be more competent. Learning to actually listen to the other side of me being like, you need a break. Something has to change. And that would happen every so often. But I was so comfortable in having that negative mindset where it was almost like, you know, shut that off. It's always been background noise. And like, you've proven yourself with the military, you've proven yourself with medical school, you've proven yourself with overcoming like your addictions and overcoming like obesity, that if you silence that, then you'll get all the success. I think once recognizing that that wasn't true, and again, that was all comparisons, and even the life I was living was all based on comparison. Is this life now the life that was promised to me? And I'm miserable now, but the life in the future that everyone tells me is great, family, white picket fence, great career, all that stuff, that is what's going to make me happy. So I kept my eye on that, not recognizing who I was there, not recognizing that everything was falling apart anyway, because this is not for me. I think that was like the main thing, and actually listening to how I talk to myself from the outside and from the inside even, reframing that self talk to actually listen and to ignore what doesn't need to be there and what doesn't serve me well. Like being able to just sift through that was huge, and I can't really pinpoint like individual pieces, even though I just did. But I
Holy
think go so much
stuff.
deeper.
Hang on. There's a really fascinating thing there that I want to kind of figure out. And correct me if I misunderstood this, but you said like there was something inside of you that was telling you that something is off. But at the same time, it's kind of like you were listening to another voice that was kind of telling you to do this, this, this. What do you think was happening there? Like, do you think the self talk was once in a while saying, huh, maybe I'm wrong? Or do you think it's that scary word that we tried so hard to define the other chapter, intuition, giving you a gut feeling that something was off? Like, what on earth was happening there that you were getting pulled in two different directions? Is the self talk sometimes divided and not sure what to do and is giving you two different opinions? Help me walk me through that. What was happening there?
So with anxiety, and people with anxiety disorders may know this quite well as well, that what happens is your mind loves anxiety because thoughts feed your mind, and so when your mind has anxiety, it has an infinite source of thoughts, which is food, and that's why they call food for thought. Bad joke. Anyway, so what happens is like you can war with it, telling yourself this is a silly thing to believe in, and you create this tension within yourself. And that's what happened with me, is that since I'm naturally prone to be neurotic and anxious, and that's always been my comfort level, even with dealing with it for so long and it manifesting in different ways, that was always the default. And this voice telling me something has to change, that was intuition. However, with that anxiety, it it was done, and it was programmed in me and wired in such a way to be like, ignore your intuition because that's laziness. That's you being lazy, listening to your intuition. That's you not being you. And since I worked on my mind so much, when it comes to like reading and like researching and studying and thinking, uh, I worked on my mind so much and ignored gaining the experience and listening to emotion. And as a result, I never trusted emotion, and obviously upbringing and all that kind of stuff too. So that voice within me telling me something needs to change, that I believe was intuition. And the reason why it wasn't so strong is because my upbringing and my natural self-talk, my comfortable way of being was telling myself, ignore your emotion, ignore your intuition. They've always served you wrong. And that was me fooling myself.
Wow, man, there's a whole new layer inside of that self-talk component, which is the tug of war battle that's happening between your intuition and your thoughts, where sometimes you're not sure who to listen to, but there's still that feeling that you're getting that something is off, and that something is off may not always be telling you the exact answer, but it's giving you some wisdom to stop and think about why you're feeling off. And maybe if you spend enough time there, you can at least pinpoint something that really needs more attention, which I thought was really beautifully put. That I almost completely lost in today's topic, because the more you're explaining it, the more I'm like, yeah, you know what? I got that bad feeling every single time that I was headed down the wrong direction, and I never knew what to call it or how to identify it. And I love that you broke it down that way, because I think that's such an important piece. A question that's worth asking for the viewers and for ourselves, something that I think I'm going to start doing more, just inspired based on today's discussion, is how would you blank if you didn't care what anyone thought? And you could replace blank with anything, right? How would you dress if you didn't care what anyone thought? How would you live if you didn't care what anyone thought? Think about how you live in your house right now. That's maybe conditioned by how you were raised, right? Like how your parents decorated the home, or what furniture you're supposed to have, or what you're supposed to put up on the wall. What would you put up on the wall if you didn't care what anyone thought? And I think that's a question that's worthy to think about with every area of your life. How would you act if you didn't care what how anyone thought of you? How would you think? How would you speak? And when you start dissecting those and you really put in that levels, that if you didn't care what anyone thought, I think that's a beautiful way of thinking, because it starts at least honing in on the root of what you want rather than what others want. I actually had to ask myself about this with the content that I put out into this world. And although I might have not phrased it the way that I just asked it, I very much asked myself what type of content I should be putting out on social media, because I think a lot about how you have a lot of people in the world that tells you what you should put out. You get a lot of statistics like likes and comments that are trying to tell you what people want. But what if you got rid of all that and you asked yourself, what do I want to put out? And it became the same when I spoke on stage. It became the same that resulted in this podcast show. It became the same when I wrote a book. And I started asking myself over and over again, what would I say if I didn't care what anyone else thought? The book was very difficult, Camille. The book, I talked about my relationship with my parents and the hardest conversations I had with them. The book, I talked about my relationship with the person I was with, that it didn't end up working out. And the fact that I put out there and not worrying about what they would have thought was one of the biggest achievements that I think I was able to do. And I highly encourage people to think about how they would have wanted to live their life if no one else thought. And also putting in the fact that it's not too late to take ownership of that part of your life. The ownership of the fact that you're not necessarily living trying to please other people, but you're trying to please yourself. You're trying to be happy for yourself. Because when it comes to the relationship with your self-talk, it's not enough to say, I'm going to prove my way of thinking wrong. It's not enough, because it's a very unhealthy, sad relationship. Imagine you lived every day waking up saying, you know what, looking yourself in the mirror and saying, you know what, I'm going to prove you wrong every single day. That's a shitty relationship with yourself. You're always trying to prove yourself wrong. And you're always trying to consider you're considering a winning day, a day that you proved your way of thinking wrong. And I think long term, that is a very, very detrimental way of living. I think the correct way of thinking is rewiring your way of thinking so that it's actually rooting for you, that it's actually supporting you, that it's actually seeing the benefits of these changes, and now it's supporting you more than it's ever have. It was hard for me to get to that level. It was hard for me to change the way that I live and my beliefs around relationships and my beliefs around how to raise children and my beliefs around marriage and my beliefs around who friends are and who you should surround yourself with, because I knew it was disappointing a lot of other people. But I gotta tell you, these days I wake up knowing that I'm the happiest I've ever been, because I root for that way of thinking. I don't push myself back against it, because for the first time, I think my intuition and the voice in my head are in complete alignment. There is no feeling in my body that's telling me something is off. There's nothing keeping me up at night and saying, I need to reassess this. Alignment is a beautiful thing when you get those two together. And I think it's given me a better relationship with myself, where that feeling of sadness when I'm alone at the end of the room or at the end of the night is is no longer there. And I think that was a beautiful way of getting there. And you've really helped me fully understand that, because that tug of war conversation between the two of them, I think made me also realize that you can actually get them both on the same side. And when you finally do, it becomes a beautiful life.
Yeah, it does, and it's very peaceful, and you'll have more energy because think about all the time you spent battling yourself about even forcing yourself to do things like making yourself a slave, and or even being like, ask this question, don't ask this question, ask this question, don't ask this question. Like it's just exhausting. So I'm wondering how you cultivated that mindset to that alignment within your intuition and your mind.
Well, let me say this, man. I don't think surrounding yourself with the right people gets enough credit for self talk. And it's strange because you think about the fact that it's almost the opposite of what we usually talk about, which is start with internal, let it showcase the results externally. But I also think there's benefits to starting with the external and allowing it to influence you internally. We talked a lot about conditioning, and conditioning, when you're headed down the wrong way, you realize that it was the people that were around you that led you astray, right? It conditioned you to act and think in a way that you're not happy with. Could it also be that if you surround yourself with the right people, the right influences, you can be dragged to the right direction? And I very much believe that. So I can't say I did this intentionally. I think this happened very unintentionally, which is when I was at the worst point in my life, I actually achieved the best growth, which is when I was in the worst point in my life, a lot of people around me started showing their true colors. A lot of people started showing me that they were either there for me or they were there for them selfishly, where when I wasn't able to serve them, they were no longer around. And what that allowed me to do was kind of rebuild my tribe from scratch. And the people that stuck with me and were truly there for me, I continued to grow with them and no one else. Because I knew without a doubt, with every fiber of my body, that the people that were around me were actually rooting for me and looking out for my best interest, which means the advice that was given to me was not selfishly so that they could get the most benefit from it, was more so that I could actually build myself to be the happiest person that I could be. So when I truly understood that, I allowed myself to listen to the right voices, if not my own. And when those voices were voices like individuals like yours and other people that I truly trusted and believed in, which over time, by listening to those voices, allowed my mental chatterbox to start listening as well. It started saying, you know what? You did listen to Camille and those other people. And you know what? It did work out for the better. Maybe I'm going to start feeding you that advice as well. So it's interesting that there's a layer to that that involves surrounding yourself with the right people first. Because what that allows you to do is not spend so much energy fighting off the voices that are trying to lead you astray. You think about if you were raised in a household by people that fed you garbage in your mind every single day. In this hypothetical situation, you're getting fed negative thoughts, negative beliefs, negative wisdom, negative treatment. But all of a sudden, those people were gone, and all of a sudden, you live now in a home with people that were teaching you kindness, good energy, good vibes, positive way of thinking, positive reinforcement, and so forth. Is it so hard to believe that you won't change for the better? And I think that's actually what happened to me, slightly by accident, but more for the more intentionally, because I decided to hold on to the right people. So I think there's a lot of wisdom there. And it's interesting as I'm thinking out loud, because I didn't think that would be my answer, but I really believe that's the case. Is I just happened to start listening to the right voices, and over time my voice fell in alignment because it saw the results of listening to the right voices. There's a line in one of the newer Drake songs that came out in his latest album that I really like. He says, "Threw dirt on my name and I grew up out of it." Treating himself like a plant metaphor, that you threw dirt on him and he grew out of it. And I think that's in many ways how I kind of think about this situation, is that it allowed me to grow out of the worst situation. And then out of growing out of that worst situation, I grew out better. I grew up and I thought about what the right decisions were and the wrong decisions were. I think about the fact that if that moment in my life didn't happen and I didn't go through those challenges, Camille, I might have still been listening to the wrong voices, still thinking it's the right decision. Which is why, coming back to many of the chapters we talked about previously, I'm so grateful these so called bad things happened to me because it allowed me to rewire myself for the better, which is why I welcome these challenges. I think it's where you have the opportunity for the ultimate growth.
You brought up a very interesting point that I think a lot of people can relate to because I think a lot of people can benefit just from, and you know what, even more quickly, just from changing their external environment. Whether that's, the nutrition you give yourself, whether that's the nutrition you give your mind, which is those people and those emotions too. Like, like removing yourself from a group that is potentially harmful to you, whether it's like people that tell you that you're bad directly or indirectly, does create such a huge change. And I think you and I think, had a huge problem with a few of our mutual friends at one point where we couldn't come to them with good news because it seemed like we were almost rubbing it in their face, and we're actually not being rewarded for that. We're actually kind of being dismissed, and we felt not sort of attacked, but like there was this kind of envy and resentment that felt like we were actually harming them by sharing our victories with those kind of people. And thinking about what kind of people you want to surround yourself with, I think that's a very good sign that those aren't really good people to be around, because here you are trying to achieve the most you can for yourself and trying to share your life with people that you care about and hoping for the best in people. But if those same people don't hope for the best for you, then, at the very least, they'll make you feel bad for your achievements. At the very worst, they could sabotage your achievements. And just inviting that possibility, it is a kind of disrespect to yourself and does kind of feed that that loop, almost in the sense that your self-talk can be influenced by that. In, did I really deserve this win, or was I lucky? Just even from that little bit of influence of resentment. And that could extend the other way too. Like, if you're in a group with surrounded by positive people, and then you're like, and you hear all the time they're like, man, you're awesome, you're smart, you're amazing, and then you're like, man, I'm so dumb. Wouldn't that feel stupid to say, like in front of all these people that are telling you like the opposite? And I think that's why I think it's a great answer to what you shared is, and I think a lot of people will benefit just even from that, because it's, don't get me wrong, there are situations where it's very difficult to change your external environment with the people you spend your time with. But maybe that's a good way to start too, is if like there are certain friendships, even family members, that you can somehow change the nature of that relationship to be one that is beneficial, whether that means completely abandoning them or changing your boundaries surrounding that friendship. That could be enough to even influence that change of promoting and cultivating a more positive self-talk that will help you achieve more and bring you closer to what you want. So I think what you shared was actually great to hear.
With friends, I know people think it's tough, but it's not. It's not as tough as you think it is. It's only tough when you're in the moment of needing to do the necessary steps. I used to think it was going to be very tough to make the decisions that I do with who I surround myself with, but in retrospect, I actually realized it was very easy. I was just holding myself back. When you think about mental walls, this is a prime mental wall, is allowing yourself mentally to make you think this is harder than it really is when you can really make that decision. I don't think the decision should be taken lightly. I do think the decision needs to be made if you truly do spend time reflecting back on what has come out of it, whether it's good or bad, and then making a decision as a result of that. We call our podcast episodes chapters because reading and listening to one chapter is not enough to tell you the full story. There are other chapters that are worth revisiting to kind of build a bridge between the two And one that comes to mind is when we talked about better reflections. When you spend time doing better reflections of where your relationship has gone, or even how you're thinking and what the results have been, it gives you an opportunity to really identify whether where you are is better than where you were yesterday. And, in a bigger scale, is it better than where you were last year, or the last decade? And these are prime reflections that will start to make you realize whether or not some changes need to be done or not. And based on that discussion, you can then you can make the decision on how you want to proceed with it along the way. The worst part is that when you're going through it, you don't realize you're going through it, as you kind of mentioned with your relationship in the past. And I've definitely experienced with my relationship in the past, as well as my friendships and even the family members that I was constantly surrounding myself with. It's sometimes hard to identify these things, which is another reason why having really good people around you helps. Because sometimes it's the people that are looking at the forest from the outside that can point out the trees, right? So when you're in the middle of it, sometimes you're unable to see where you are, but they're able to scope it out and point out that something is wrong. We've had multiple conversations in the past where something would be highlighted about someone that would be off, and I would sometimes not see it. I'd be like, I don't see it. And then later I would see it, and I would ask myself, how could I be so stupid and not see it? So admittedly, it's sometimes hard to kind of point out when something is off, but it's very much possible if you give yourself the time to reflect, or have people around you that are pointing that out at the same time, which I think can be very, very beneficial. The final part that I'll leave about people here that I think is very important is, I think it's important to not let someone define what a good relationship is. And I know that there's some obvious ones, like does the person treat you well and so forth. But there's a lot of other ways that people shouldn't be defining relationships. For example, like a lot of people kind of talk about like, hey, you should have a good relationship with your siblings, or you should be buddy buddy with your siblings, or you should always be in touch with this family member and that family member and so forth. But I was like, do you really need to? Like, is it actually the definition of what makes you the happiest? Like, what if you are happier not having a relationship with that person? Right? What if your life is better because you don't have that disconnect, you don't have that issue or that conflict floating over you, or a voice in your ear? Like, could it be better? I know there's one solution where you could try to make that relationship better. You may be able to try to ease the way that the conversation goes. You may try to input better conversations, but you don't have to. And it may be the better outcome of not having a relationship with that person at all. And the question I ask myself that puts me to sleep every night is, have I tried to make that person better while I was in that relationship with them? And this could be family members, this could be friends, and this could be your significant other at that time. Have you been trying to make them better than they are? And if the answer is yes, which in my scenario, it's almost always been yes. And as a matter of fact, I think always has been yes. I'm at peace with that. I'm at peace with that relationship not being existent anymore, based on the fact that it didn't work out. And I'm okay with that, knowing that I've tried my best. And I think that's a great measurement and a great way of keeping track of whether it's better or not. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing more important than being protective of your own mental health and your own way of thinking. And the question you need to ask yourself is that addition into your life good or worse for your way of thinking and your self-talk? And if it's worse, then you need to use that as a strong indicator to decide if you want to continue having a relationship with that person or that thing, whether it's an activity or a behavior that you have, and maybe disconnect with it. And don't let anyone tell you that disconnecting is always a bad thing. There's plenty of opportunities to better your life by disconnecting from people or certain things as well. That's at least my way of thinking about it, Camille. What about yours?
I agree completely too. I think there's so much nuance to any kind of relationship, and I think because the way people just say throw out blanket statements like you have to do this or whatever, why? And to be honest, the answer never is satisfying most of the time, because the truth is like there can be so many reasons why it's better not to have that relationship, or even to have to define it in in the way you want to. Once you become your own person, it's kind of expected that you can create your own definitions and your own relationships that you so choose. And hopefully, hopefully they aren't harmful to you or to the other person. And I think what you described is very good. Like have you been trying to make the person better while still having the relationship? And if the answer is yes, and yet you still feel like this relationship isn't working for you, then that does need to be re-examined. And I think as well, being mindful of your own ego, as because I think well, maybe a sticking point for me was there was a huge ego piece to a lot of the relationships that I carried, and maybe a lot of the reasons why it was negative was my own um, ego and my own identity surrounding that relationship. Almost like kind of like I'm too good for you, and yet you still don't want anything to do with me. Then that means that that you're gonna burn. It ends up being kind of destructive as well. So I think examining everything and actually being conscious of what you actually want and how to obtain that, and to actually connect that to who you are in the core being and who you are in your core values is very important information for whether or not those relationships work for you. But as you said, it has to be an uh, individual decision, not based on arbitrary things like what are other people going to think.
When it comes to a few things in the world that it's okay to be selfish with, I think this is definitely one of them. Be selfish about what's good for your mental health. Be selfish about what allows you to have positive self talk, and be very aware of the things that are straying you away from anything but positive self talk. And I think it's very important. Camille, with the few minutes that we have left, I want to allow you to kind of just lay out some practical takeaways if possible. Okay. So we're in a scenario where, we've given a lot, and sometimes you have to kind of sift through to kind of find the gems. But so I want to kind of streamline it in this opportunity that we have in a few minutes. If someone is challenged with positive self talk, they want to achieve a lot in their life, and they're being limited by these, as we talked about, these mental walls that they're putting. Limiting beliefs is a phrase that we hear a lot. They're being challenged and they're being held back by the conversation they're having with themselves. What are some practical things that they could start doing right now, though it may not give them the results overnight? It can at least start letting them head down the right direction. What would you advise the person to start doing right away?
Best thing to do is actually write down your thoughts, because then you can see how cruel you are to yourself, or whether or not you believe these things. And then ask yourself, would you say this about a person you care about? I think that alone can help you define whether or not these are good or bad thoughts. However, I think what has helped me a lot, especially in these past couple of months, is recognizing the origin of where they come from, whether or not it's from these situations that were gathered. Like when I have these thoughts, sometimes I can be like, hold on, what was that for a second? Why am I thinking this way? And see what I come up with. How does that make me feel? When have I felt like this before? When was the first time I felt like this? And allowing myself to actually sit with that negative emotion and be kind to myself while experiencing that has been super helpful. And especially recognizing that the digger you deep and the further is down, that same age where that memory and that trauma was created is the same age that you're going to feel that emotion from. So you can obviously agree that a 20-year-old is better at processing emotion than a 6-year-old. So you have to be kind to yourself in that way and talk to yourself like an older, gentle sibling would. So having that would kind of help with the better self-talk. And I think a lot of negative self-talk nowadays comes from anxiety, and that comes from expectation, whether that's expectation of yourself, of who you are as a person because of the identity that you create. So these labels of I'm smart, I'm not, you have to pay attention to that, and being able to detach yourself from the outcome, because you have to recognize that even with the positive or the negative labels you attach, that creates a certain expectation, and then you can betray yourself with that outcome and actually prevent yourself from achieving more of what you want. So being able to detach yourself from your identity, like with I am this quality or I am this person, is very important. Identifying your core values, what you truly believe in, and what you want to live and the way you want to live. I think having that in your core and actually writing it down and putting it in a place that you can see it will help you remind yourself that this is who you want to be. And then that'll help you recognize these thoughts even more. And the first step is always awareness, then being able to detach, being able to process, being able to feel, and then eventually repeating that process over to a point where I think the best thing, which has helped me the most, is being able to detach those emotions that I can't control, because we can't control our emotion or the emotions of other people, and using that as information. What do I want to do with this information? I feel like I'm going to die if I do this. Do I believe it? Is this worth listening to? Or do I see the obvious benefit of doing this and it's worth the risk? Being able to actually act upon that takes a certain level of courage, and that will help you build more confidence within yourself. So when you have more confidence from, again, attempting the unknown, not being successful, but even just the attempt at the unknown, that makes you more of you and more stronger. And I think that will cultivate that more positive self-talk.
Geez, Camille, you are the man. Like the way you broke that out and even outlined it like a cycle of steps that someone could follow in order to really start rewiring. I think you put it best, man. I don't know if I could add anything else on top of that. I think that is truly the best way to start on top of everything else that we talked about on today's chapter. For those of you that are listening, if you came this far and you haven't hit the like or subscribe button, you are breaking our hearts. I don't know what else you want me to say. Like, come on, are you serious? But we're forever grateful. And as you've noticed, the quotes that you send us, the messages that you send us, the feedback that you give us, we bring that back. We reflect it on these episodes, and in many ways, you inspire the topic of the week. And we encourage you to keep doing that. And we thank you for listening, Camille. Thank you so much for joining me and jamming yet again, bringing your best, giving us some real gems that we could really bank on. I appreciate all that you do, and I'm excited to jam with you again on chapter 13. I feel like 13 should have been our Halloween number. Chapter 13.
Yeah.
I'll see you again next week. Thank you so much, Camille.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.